She posted a video in July 2026 with a title that stopped nearly 1 million people mid-scroll. 6 words. It served us well, but it's time. That title belonged to Becky, the woman behind Acre Homestead, one of the most quietly powerful homesteading channels YouTube has ever produced, and it was the clearest signal she had ever sent to her community that something major was ending. By the time you finish this video, you will understand exactly what she is walking away from, what she is walking toward, and why the path she has taken in the last 2 years was never really a choice at all. Becky did not grow up on a farm. She did not inherit 100 acres from a grandparent, or show up on YouTube with decades of growing experience behind her, or arrive with a ready-made homestead and a ready-made brand. She started Acre Homestead in June 2020 from a modest property in southwest Washington state, in Hardiness Zone 8A, with no particular background in agriculture and no guarantee that any of it would work. What she had was a camera, a piece of land, and the willingness to do something that very few creators in the homesteading space were actually doing at the time. She learned in front of her audience, not in the selective, highlight reel way that most lifestyle creators learn in public, where the lessons are curated and the failures are smoothed over before the video goes live. Becky showed the actual process, the failed batches, the chickens that did not make it through a hard winter, the canning attempts that had to be redone because the first round was not safe, the garden beds that looked nothing like the seed packets promised, every setback documented, every course correction explained, every moment of genuine uncertainty shared with an audience that was experiencing the same uncertainty themselves. That transparency was not a content strategy, or if it started as one, it stopped being just a strategy the moment her audience started to reflect it back at her. The comments on her early videos were not the detached, algorithmic engagement of a channel people had stumbled into by accident. They were the comments of people who felt like they were learning alongside someone. People who had also bought land they were not sure how to use, or started a garden in the middle of a pandemic because the grocery store had become unreliable, or were trying to feed a family from scratch for the first time and finding it harder and more rewarding than anyone had warned them. Becky's channel became a kind of permission structure. You do not need to already know how to do this. You are allowed to start without knowing. You are allowed to show the process, not just the result. The audience that found her on the basis of that permission structure was not casual. They were invested. They came back every week not because the production value was exceptional, or because the thumbnails were especially clever, but because they cared about whether the sourdough worked, and whether the garden came in, and whether the young woman in Southwest Washington was figuring it out. That is a different kind of loyalty than most YouTube channels ever managed to build. 6 years later, nearly 1 million people had subscribed, and then she posted 6 words that told all of them at once that this particular chapter was over. And that is when the decision was made, the one nobody around her saw coming. The dream Becky had been working toward on that first small property became concrete in June 2022. She bought a new homestead, her own land, space to expand everything she had been growing into since 2020. More garden beds, a proper chicken setup, room to build the kind of from-scratch pantry operation that had become not just the backbone of her content, but the actual operating principle of her family's life. She documented the purchase and the move in real time, the way she documented everything. The house tour, the walk through the property, moving day, with all the chaos and optimism that comes with beginning something new. Her audience showed up for every frame of it. It was, by every reasonable metric, the moment the channel reached its peak ambition. She had built the thing she said she was going to build, not a simulation of a homesteading life, an actual one. The land was real, the garden was going in, the chickens were coming. And nearly 1 million people were watching because they had been there for the whole journey, from the first hesitant videos on a smaller property to this full-scale version of a life lived on purpose. The content from that period drew some of the strongest numbers the channel had ever produced. A dinner party video pulled over 1 million views. Viewers were no longer just interested in the homestead itself at that point. They were interested in Becky as a host, a cook, a woman building a life that was visible and intentional, and genuinely her own. But 2022 brought something beyond a new property. That same year, Becky and her husband announced they were expecting their first child. She documented that chapter too, the pregnancy, the preparation, the anticipation. And then came the parts that most creators in her space would have quietly edited out. A raw, real labor and delivery story shared in 2 parts. A postpartum hospitalization that nobody had anticipated. The kind of vulnerable, medically honest content that her audience had not come for, but stayed for, because it was the same unfiltered Becky they had always known. in a situation they had not expected. That decision, to keep showing the full picture when the full picture was difficult, would turn out to be the most important creative choice she ever made. Not because it generated views, but because it built something views cannot build. It built trust. The specific, durable trust that comes from watching someone be honest in a moment when dishonesty would have been easier. And that trust was the thing that held the community together when 2025 arrived. What happened next is the reason this story spread across the internet. In April 2025, Becky posted a video with a title that told her audience something was wrong before a single frame played. A very fun day with very sad update. She had experienced a pregnancy loss. She did not frame it for maximum engagement. She did not bury it in a vlog or save it for a standalone announcement designed to perform well in the algorithm. She told the people who had been watching her life for 5 years what had happened. In the same direct, unembellished way she had always talked about difficult things. The same voice she had used to describe the failed canning run. The same tone she had brought to the postpartum hospitalization. Honest, present, not performing. The response from her community was not what you typically see when a creator shares hard news. It was not the formulaic condolences that fill comment sections out of obligation. The boilerplate expressions of support that disappear as quickly as the algorithm moves on. It was the response of people who genuinely knew her, or who had spent enough time in her content over 5 years, that the distinction between knowing someone and feeling like you know them had stopped mattering. The comment sections filled with people who had been through their own losses. People who had followed the channel since 2020 and felt the specific weight of this specific piece of news. People who had no adequate words and left only the briefest acknowledgments that they were there and they had heard her. Those comments are still there, worth reading if you want to understand what kind of community this channel built. 3 months later, in July 2025, Becky announced she was pregnant again. A rainbow baby, the term used for a child born after a pregnancy loss. This second pregnancy came with its own medical complexity, gestational diabetes. A condition she was open about throughout the second half of 2025, sharing the management process, the dietary adjustments, the monitoring, the reality of a medically complicated pregnancy when you are already carrying the weight of a loss. These videos did not go viral. They do not have the view counts of the dinner party content or the pantry restocks, but the people who needed them found them, in the way that the internet works at its best, the right content reaching the right person at the right moment. Pregnant women navigating gestational diabetes, who typed the right search terms and landed on a creator who had been through it and was talking about it clearly and without drama. The number that came next, nobody who followed this channel expected it. Her daughter arrived in January 2026. Becky shared the news in a short real-time update. Direct, warm, exactly what anyone who had followed the channel would have predicted she would do. Baby girl, home, healthy, a family of 4. The same understated register she had brought to every announcement she had ever made, from the first garden tour to the hardest video she ever uploaded. But that arrival, that specific, long-anticipated, emotionally loaded moment, changed the practical mathematics of the channel in ways that took a few months to become fully visible to the outside. Becky now had 2 children under the age of 4. She had a homestead that had been under active renovation throughout a high-risk pregnancy. She had a channel with nearly 1 million subscribers that expected consistent content. She had a business infrastructure, the Scratch Pantry brand, the newsletter, the recipe archive, the affiliate relationships that required attention independent of the YouTube channel. And she had a content identity that had been quietly evolving for more than a year, shifting in ways that the channel name no longer accurately described. If you scroll the Acre Homestead uploads from late 2024 through the middle of 2026 without any prior context, you do not land on what most people would call a homesteading channel, not in the way the term was understood when she started in 2020. You land on something that has the DNA of a homesteading channel, the pantry orientation, the from-scratch philosophy, the practical, unglamorous honesty about process, but that has become something the original name was never built to contain. A spring pantry challenge, 4 weeks of eating from existing freezer stores before any big shopping. 14 pounds of ground beef turned into a month of easy family meals. A huge Azure Standard restock. A dinner made for a couple celebrating their 60th wedding anniversary. A cast iron restoration project. Satisfaction guaranteed. A Costco run for a large family spring dinner. A June garden tour covering what thrived, what failed, what surprised her. The soil was still there, the chickens were still there. But the camera was pointing at something broader, and the person behind it was telling a different story. And behind the scenes, the brand had moved further than the camera. Here's what the comments kept asking, and here's the answer they never got, until now. While Becky's audience was watching the homestead, Becky was building something parallel and quieter. The website her videos had been pointing toward for years, scratchpantry.com, was not a simple newsletter landing page. It was infrastructure. A platform built around a version of Becky that was not geographically tied to Southwest Washington, not dependent on the Acre Homestead brand name, not limited to an audience that had come looking for homesteading content specifically. A version of Becky built around the philosophy that had always been at the center of the work: cooking from scratch, stocking a pantry with intention, feeding a family well on homemade food with full knowledge of what is in it. Understanding why this matters requires understanding what a pivot is not. A pivot is reactive. A pivot is a creator watching their metrics decline in a niche and making a calculated jump to something with stronger numbers. What Becky built at Scratch Pantry looks nothing like that, because it did not start with numbers. It started with the same question her channel had always been built on: what does it actually mean to feed a family from scratch, and how do you build the systems and the skills to do it reliably? The homestead was where she worked that question out physically. The garden, the chickens, the canning, the pantry built from things she grew or preserved herself. But the answer to the question, the actual philosophy, was never location dependent. It was never contingent on owning an acre in Zone 8A. It was a way of thinking about food and independence and domestic skill that could apply anywhere a kitchen existed. Scratch Pantry was the name she gave to the philosophy when she was ready to let it stand independently of the physical location where she had discovered it. By the time her daughter was born in January 2026, Scratch Pantry had a newsletter with a dedicated subscriber base, a recipe archive that stood on its own merits outside of any YouTube algorithm, a brand partnership with a major gardening supply company, and a presence that her most engaged audience members had already migrated toward. The Acre Homestead name was still on the YouTube channel, but the creative and commercial center of gravity had moved. She had not announced this. She had not made a video about it. She had simply built it and let the work speak. At this point in the story, most people walked away. What she did instead is the part nobody talks about. On July 8, 2026, Becky uploaded a video with a title she had clearly thought about. It served us well, but it's time. 6 years, nearly 1 million subscribers, 2 properties, 1 move, a son born at the end of 2022, a postpartum hospitalization, a pregnancy loss in early 2025, a rainbow baby announced 3 months later, gestational diabetes managed through the back half of a difficult year, a daughter born in January 2026, a chicken coop completed in the summer of 2026, a garden planted to carry the family through winter. 6 years of all of that, compressed into 6 words. The title is both a farewell and a statement of gratitude. It is not "I'm done," or "the channel is ending," or "I made a mistake," or "here is why I am leaving." It is, "This thing served its purpose. This chapter did what it was supposed to do. And now it is time for whatever comes next." That is a particular kind of creative maturity that is genuinely rare in the creator economy, where the incentive structures push relentlessly toward keeping every version of a brand alive as long as it is monetizable, regardless of whether the brand still accurately describes what is being made or who is making it. Most channels that go through the kind of identity evolution Acre Homestead has experienced over the last 2 years do not name it. They let the audience notice the change without acknowledging it. They keep the original brand name on the channel long past the point where it describes anything real, because changing it feels like a risk, and the audience knows the old name, and the algorithm has indexed it, and the revenue is still coming in, and it is easier to just keep going. Becky named it. On a Tuesday in July, in 6 words, she told the audience she had spent 6 years building that the container they had come to recognize was being retired. Not the content, not the philosophy, not the work, the name. And the audience that had followed her through 6 years of her naming things directly, the failed harvest, the hospitalization, the loss, the difficult second pregnancy, knew exactly what she was doing because she had been doing it from the very beginning. And if you think that was surprising, stay with me, because this next part is why the whole story matters. What Becky's life actually looks like in the summer of 2026 is worth being specific about, because the easy version of this story frames it as someone who left homesteading and now makes cooking videos. That is not what happened. The chickens moved into a new coop in early July 2026, a project she documented in real time. From the build through to the first day the flock settled into the new space. Her June garden tour went through the summer beds in detail. What was thriving beyond expectations? What had failed outright and why? What had surprised her in the way that gardens always surprise honest gardeners? She ran a 4-week spring pantry challenge through June and into the first week of July, eating from existing freezer stores and pantry stock, before doing any major restocking, practical, unglamorous, exactly the kind of content her original audience came for. She made 14 pounds of ground beef stretch into a month of family meals. She did a major Scratch Pantry restock. She went out looking for vintage dishes and came home with something she had not expected. She planted crops in the spring that were chosen specifically to carry the family through the following winter. Her daughter is roughly 6 months old. Her son is 3. There are 2 children in the house that were not there when this channel launched. The homestead, in its physical form, has not gone anywhere. If anything, summer 2026 is among the most productive seasons the property has seen. New infrastructure, an active garden, a working flock. The actual labor of homesteading, physical, demanding, unglamorous, deeply satisfying in ways that only the people who do it understand, is still happening, daily. But the person doing it has changed. The woman who started this channel in 2020 was learning. The woman posting videos in the summer of 2026 knows what she is doing, has done it enough times to stop discovering and start teaching, and is building a platform around that knowledge that no longer needs the word acre in its name to be credible. That shift, from student to practitioner, is the one that every long-running creator eventually faces. Most navigate it without naming it. Becky named it. She always has. She never talked about this publicly, until now. Acre, there is a version of this story that gets told as a loss. Creator walks away from the niche that built her. Nearly 1 million subscribers came for the homesteading and are getting dinner party content instead. Another rural channel quietly fades into aspirational cooking and Costco hauls. The agricultural identity retired because the algorithm likes the food content better. A community built around a specific, unglamorous, hard-earned lifestyle loses the thing that made the community worth being part of. That version is not accurate. It is not accurate in ways that matter if you actually understand what Becky built. The acre was never the point. The acre was the classroom. It was the specific physical location where she worked out a philosophy that had nothing to do with location. The philosophy that knowing how to feed your family from scratch, building a pantry that can sustain you independently, growing food with your own hands, and cooking it without shortcuts, is an act of genuine self-determination that most of the modern food system is not designed to encourage. That philosophy did not change when the pregnancy loss happened. It did not change when the rainbow baby arrived with a gestational diabetes diagnosis. It did not change when a second child was born in January, and the family of 2 became a family of 4, and the logistics of running a nearly 1 million subscriber channel while raising 2 young children became the central challenge of her professional life. The philosophy held through all of it, because it was never about the acre. Scratch Pantry is not what you name something when you are abandoning the people who built your audience. It is what you name it when you have finally understood what your work was always actually about. When the philosophy has grown bigger than the specific lifestyle context where you first discovered it, and you need a name that can carry the philosophy forward without being anchored to a geographic and lifestyle identity you have outgrown. The name Acre Homestead described who Becky was in June 2020. A young woman learning to grow food on a small property in Washington, making every mistake in public, building something from nothing. That chapter is documented permanently in 6 years of videos that are not going anywhere. But the person in July 2026, the one who has been through a loss and a rainbow baby, and a difficult second pregnancy, and a daughter born in January, is not that person. She is who that person became, and the name built in 2020 was never built to hold all of that. She outgrew the container, and she said so, in 6 words, on a Tuesday in July, to the nearly 1 million people who had watched her do exactly that. 6 years is a long time to build something in public. What Becky built was not just a YouTube channel. It was a real-time record of one person's attempt to build a life on her own terms, honest enough that nearly 1 million people found some version of their own life inside it. She is not walking away from her audience. She is doing what the most self-aware creators eventually do, letting the brand catch up to the person, even when that means retiring a name that once meant everything. Watch what she builds under the Scratch Pantry name. Because if the last 6 years are any indication, it will be built the same way the first chapter was. One imperfect, documented, genuinely honest step at a time. Do you think Becky made the right call walking away from the Acre Homestead identity? Or is that the thing that made her channel worth watching, and should she have held on to it? Drop your answer below.